This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
I'm here for Straight Goods News at the University of Ottawa's Faculty of Law with Manuel Perez Rocha, who works in Washington involving in different international agreements, including NAFTA. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and what brought you here?
Yeah, I
to
work
the
at the
University
Institute
of
for
Ottawa?
Policy Studies promoting a project called the Network for Justice and Global Investment. The investment rules are a part of free trade agreements like NAFTA and CAFTA that are very rigged rules in favor of corporations that are undermine sovereignty and the possibility of governments of developing responsible public policies in favor of the environment and human rights.
And can you, I know it's very challenging because it was a 2-hour question and answer and presentation period with documentaries, but can you give a little bit of a summary of the kinds of things that you thought maybe might be new information to some of the students here and to kind of a lot of Canadian citizens?
Well, there are actually hundreds of cases in which corporations are bringing whole countries in Latin America and elsewhere, but mainly in Latin America, increasingly in Latin America, to international courts, international tribunals that are unaccountable, and suing them for precisely designing and applying responsible public policies that respond to the environment and respond to the demands of the population, for example, for clean water, for example, there are so many cases of companies that are bringing countries to international tribunals, unaccountable tribunals, in Washington, in New York, elsewhere, in which countries are being sued because their governments have been designing and applying responsible tools for the environment and responding to the demands of the people in terms of defending them from irresponsible corporations, in particular mining, oil, gas, etc.
Okay, I know that you are of Mexican descent and then you work in Washington, but what kind of, and you may not have too much knowledge about the Canadian system, but what kind of advice would you give the average Canadian law student, activist, person interested in these kinds of issues? What kind of change can we create here?
I would ask the Canadian students and the Canadian people, and I work with many Canadian organizations, so this ask is being made together with Canadian civil society organizations to take a close look at what Canadian mining companies are doing in Latin America. It is terrible, the destruction of the environment. It is terrible how companies divide whole communities. It is terrible how then these companies bring governments and sue them in international tribunals like the exit of the World Bank when governments in these countries take responsible measures that prevent the profits of these companies. So I would really recommend to take a close look about the action of these corporations. Sometimes they do often, and they do a lot of effort in promoting themselves as socially responsible, but there's a lot of whitewashing this. If you listen to the people in Latin America, this is not so. There are lots of communities from Mexico to Argentina that are being devastated.
Is there anything else you'd like to share on this topic, or anything else you'd like to elaborate upon?
Well, I would just like to say that this is what we're living today with this increased rate of governments being sued is precisely what we were fearing when we were fighting against free trade agreements like NAFTA and CAFTA. This is now the reality. What we're witnessing now is the reality, and what we were warning about, the complete subversion of democracy and the complete subversion of sovereignty of countries that have fallen into the trap and into the mirage of these free trade agreements that are not so much free trade agreements. They're more like the freedom to loot, the freedom given to corporations to loot.